We're ready, Johnny.
Oh, yeah, sure. Thanks, Michelle. I appreciate the introduction. As Michelle mentioned, I'm the manager of engineering and system performance. If you're unfamiliar with my group and their role within our organization, we're on the non-compliance side. We evaluate risk. We have a lot of transmission planners or former transmission planners in my group. So we look at risk from that standpoint. We do a lot of power flow analysis and other types of analysis like that within my group. We also help collect a lot of the outage data associated with transmission lines, transformers, misoperations, generators. So if you submit data to the XAD suites of tools, TADS, GADS, Midas in the Aero Enterprise, well, you're probably interacting with someone from my group while you're doing that. And then we also help facilitate a lot of our technical committees here at RF, and I'll talk about those a little bit later. But just to give you an idea who I am and what we do here at Reliability First, you can go to the next slide, Michelle. So real quickly, I'm going to present the latest and greatest regional risk assessment. We have a neat little infographic that has some fast facts about our footprint. I'm going to give you an overview of the RRA that we performed recently. And I'm going to talk about a little bit some of the changes that we implemented this time around. We're trying to mature this report assessment every year and get a little bit better. So I'm going to talk about how we tried to do that this year. And then I'm going to go through painstakingly each one of the risks. And I want to just say up front that each one of these risks, I could probably talk for an hour or two about each one of the risks. And I boiled them down to like one or two slides for some of them. So if I didn't include something and you were a helper on this report, whether you're internal or external, please don't be offended. I tried to put as much content in there as I could, but um, so just be aware that in the full report that will be released shortly to the public here, there'll be a lot more detail associated with each one of these risk topics that I'm going to cover. And then at the end, I'm going to cover some interdependencies we observed while performing this work between the risk categories within the RF footprint. You can go to the next slide. So again, this is some of those fast facts. I'm not going to read each one of these to you. I'll let you kind of take a look at this on your own. But just to give you an idea, we have a pretty big geographic footprint, all the way from New Jersey to Wisconsin. We have a significant amount of registered entities, and in fact, we've had a large influx of registered entities over the last several years. And I would be remiss to tell you that when this report was created, we had 301 registered entities. And I don't want Bob Folk coming over to me later, who handles all our registrations at RF. That the latest number is actually 308. We've had some increases since this report was finalized. So just kind of want to throw that out there so Bob doesn't get mad at me. We have a substantial amount of lines and transformers, about 62,000 miles of BES transmission, about 1,200 generating units. Our forecasted load is 161 gigawatts, and our forecasted generation is 224 gigawatts. So it's good that we have more generation than load, but remember, the RF footprint isn't operated like a normal RTO. We have both PJM and MISO represented in our footprint. So take that for what it's worth. All right, let's go to the next slide. So this is kind of just an overview of what we did this year with the RRA. Over to the right is a table of the list of risk categories. So I'm going to cover each one of these in detail later on in the presentation, but this is just to give you a kind of a generic list. And what we do is we bucketize these risks into larger categories. And these are risks that we and some of our technical committee members feel are the most substantial within our footprint. Now, I'll caveat that by saying these aren't all the risks within our footprint. These are the ones that came to light during internal analysis and discussion. So just take that for what it's worth as well. And we only look at these risks from a regional perspective. So if you've watched any of the other regional entities or even NERC's ERO read their report on their risk categories, there might be a little nuance, a little bit nuance, some differences here. That's expected. Each region has their own perspective and their own risks that they're dealing with based on how their overall region's performing. Um, so again, we focus on the pertinent risks here. We basically try to do a comprehensive review or analysis of each one of these risk categories. So we'll look at any type of data that we can get our hands on, whether it's something that's right at our fingertips or a third-party source. We'll review trends. We'll identify areas that require focus. And that's really the whole purpose of this, is to identify gaps and try to determine how it's going to shape our work moving forward. And now, when I say our work moving forward, our future work, that means compliance, that means outreach, such as assist visits, webinars, workshops, committee work, one-on-one engagements, the tech talk, everything we do. This doesn't tell us how to do that work. It just informs us where maybe we should be focusing. So just keep that in mind as well. And it's conducted approximately every 2 years, because it's a big effort to get this analysis off the ground and then put it into a final formal report. Let's jump to the next slide. Oh, I got to stop because I want to let the audience know I have a very loose presentation style, and I welcome questions. So if you do have questions, please feel free to submit those via Slido. If you work at RF, throw me a couple softball questions so I look much smarter than I am. I would really appreciate that. So, all right. So changes from the previous RRA. This is something we're really proud of. This is the first time release of a public-facing RRA. Previously, this has been an internal-only developed and viewed report. So we would develop this kind of in a little bit of a silo internal to RF, using all of our SMEs that are at RF and perform our own analysis and then help influence the work we do year over year. This is the first time we've kind of opened it up, and we've involved our stakeholders from our technical committees, and we're gonna publish the report publicly. So pretty soon, as Michelle mentioned at the beginning of the tech talk, we'll be putting that out. It should be available possibly on our website, and you can take a look and digest all the detail that I'm going to miss in this presentation, right? We also developed what we called risk considerations. So when we were having detailed internal and discussions within our technical committees, there were a lot of themes that kept emerging as far as things that impacted the risk. And I'm going to cover that in a little more detail later. So we basically said, okay, when we're reviewing each one of these risk categories, let's make sure we focus on these risk considerations while we're reviewing each one of these risk categories. And I think it worked out pretty well. So I'll cover that in a little more detail in this presentation. And then we split the cyber and physical security risks into separate risks. We historically had put those together, but some of the internal SMEs really felt strongly about separating them, and I'm kind of glad we did, because we ended up coming to a little bit of a different prioritization and conclusion for each one of those. And then this year, a new risk category that we added is supply chain. So we added this as a top regional risk as well. So let's go to the next slide. I wanted to talk a little bit about our technical committees. I'll try not to bore you too much with all the details of what each one of these groups are and what they do, but the ones that are highlighted in red are the ones that my group helps facilitate. And all of these groups, in some way, shape, or form, eventually report back up to our board of directors. So the abridged version of this story is we wanted to boost engagement and provide extra value in these technical committees. So what we did about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, is we conducted one-on-one interviews with a sampling of stakeholders, utility registered entities that participate in these committees, and tried to get their feedback on how to improve these committees and boost engagement. A lot of them were interested in providing some sort of deliverable, something of value that the rest of industry could take advantage of. And so once we kind of digested that internally and then presented those results to our board, the recommendation came back that let's let the technical committees have a seat at the table when we're developing this RRA. So that's what we did this year. We had each one of these technical committees, the reliability committee, the protection subcommittee, and the transmission performance subcommittee participate in the RRA. And I'll cover what exactly they did on the next slide. I did want to indicate, though, we do have the Critical Infrastructure and Protection Committee, and I'm thinking as this process matures, we'll probably try and loop them in to get some of their perspective as well. So if you're in the SIPC and you didn't participate and you're like, what the heck, I didn't get an invite, don't worry, we know you're there. We're going to try and include you next time around as this matures over time. So the standards committee is a little bit of a different animal. All I'll say is that committee is only active while we're reviewing our one regional standard that we have, BAL 502. So we technically don't reach out to them for the RRA because of that. So I'm going to jump to the next slide. So here's how each of the committees basically helped us along the way with development of the RRA. The Reliability Committee basically assisted in development of what are the risk categories, how are they going to be modified from last time around, and then they actually received a survey to help rank the risk categories, help us prioritize those risk categories. And then eventually they'll review some of the reporting that was put out by the other subcommittees that report to the Reliability Committee. And take in mind, the Reliability Committee is a overarching group that has all sorts of different types of SMEs in it. It has maintenance people, operations people, planning people, compliance people, generator owners, generator operators. So we get the full gambit of all the different types of SMEs in the Reliability Committee. So we felt that's the best place to have the conversation about those broader risks impacting our footprint. The protection subcommittee is a bunch of protection system engineers, and they actually developed their own internal risk report based on the metrics gathered from some of those tools that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, those XAD suite of tools, mainly MIDAS, which tallies all the operations, and we get the misoperation rate from MIDAS. So they basically put together a report that provided insights on misoperations, environmental factors, and human performance, and developed their own report. And we used a lot of the content from that report to develop the actual charts, graphs, verbiage in the RRA that you're going to see publicly. The Transmission Performance Subcommittee, that's typically an audience of transmission planners within our footprint. And they did something very similar. They produced their own internal report from XAD's data. They looked at event response resilience, environmental factors, and human performance. And they developed their own internal report as well. And a lot of that content went right into the RRA. Now, I would encourage you, if you're not participating in these committees right now and you're a registered entity and you want a seat at the table for the development of that RRA that shapes our future work, give me a call, shoot me an email, or anyone here at RF on the Tech Talk, and we'll get you plugged in to the right committee based on your subject matter expertise. So if you're not a member, be a member, I guess is my plug there for my the technical committee responsible for facilitating. Next slide. So risk considerations. These are the common themes that kept coming up on every risk category that we were reviewing. And those are human performance, which is basically looking at how much training have you received, has your personnel received, how many internal controls do you have to prevent human error, what kind of metrics are surrounding human error for each one of these risk categories. Do your folks follow established processes and procedures, that kind of thing. So we tried to look at that perspective for each one of these risk categories. Policy and standards, these are basically local state and federal policies and how they influence the risk, whether they're helping or accelerating risk or making it something we need to focus on. Resilience, this is just looking at overall, how resilient is the grid? How quick are our response time to events? Once an outage occurs, how quickly are we at basically responding and making sure that we keep the lights on and that outage facility gets put back into service? At restoration, how are we prepared to perform restoration activities? That's all under the umbrella of resilience. Uncertainty. This was something we used to have, and I'll cover this on the next slide. But we used to have a category called unknowns, unknown unknowns, and we thought, well, really that applies to every single risk category. So let's talk about uncertainty. Do we have the right data? How certain are we that the data we do have is accurate? Do we need third-party resources? How confident are we in our subject matter expertise, our subjective opinion on certain risks? Those type of things. Also, are we not collecting enough data to be certain on our assessment of the risk? And that actually splitting it out like this drove a lot of improvements that we're going to work towards the next time around for this assessment. Okay, next slide shows the risk prioritization. So there are no numbers here, but if you want to kind of show the priority of these risks, it kind of starts in the top left and you work your way down. So the number one risk was environmental factors, then cybersecurity, changing resource mix, supply chain, physical security, so on and so forth. I just want to state though that, again, all of these risks are a priority for us. These are the heavy hitters we see in our region. They're all ranked fairly close to one another. And I would say all of these are important risks, regardless of the priority. And then as we are evaluating these, I'll cover this a little bit at the end. I won't cover all of the interdependencies that we found, but we found that a lot of these risks have substantial interdependencies anyways, and that, it's bad if one of these risks happens in a vacuum, but if two of them happen simultaneously, it's really bad. The Swiss cheese approach. If all the holes align, all the stars align, and the catastrophic thing happens. So that's something we observed when ranking these as well. Okay, so now it's the portion where I have a lot of information to get through, and again, I could talk hours about each one of these risk categories, and there's a lot of content, a lot of analysis that went into each one of these, but unfortunately, I don't have the time. So if you go to the next slide, I'm going to talk first about environmental factors. And really what this is just natural occurring phenomena, extreme weather and extreme weather events. We also lump vegetation in here as well, since that's a environmentally driven type outage based on trees and your ability to manage those trees. So one thing I want to focus on first is cold weather. That's obviously a big deal within our footprint. We've had about 5 cold weather events in the past 11 years that resulted in substantial generation unavailability or firm load shed. That's not just our footprint, that's across North America. So the latest cold weather event, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, is Winter Storm Elliott. And during that event, about 5 gigawatts of firm load was shed. Now, this was not shed within the ReliabilityFirst footprint. Fortunate for our footprint, both PJM and MISO declared energy emergencies. And as a result of their actions through the energy emergencies, we did not have to require firm load shed within our footprint. But if you kind of just take a look at the numbers, PJM and MISO experienced about 91 gigawatts of generation unavailability at one point in time. So that's substantial. So that's a big risk that we're continuing to focus on. You'll notice that, through your interaction with NERC and their reliability standards, we had a FERC and NERC joint inquiry report. We also had one of those for Winter Storm Uri, which happened before this one. But out of that came 11 recommendations. Some of those were beefing up our existing reliability standards, which include EOP 11, EOP 13, IRO 10, TOP 003, TOP 5. Some of you are probably on the standard drafting teams or have provided comments or voted on those standards. We also, during some of the assessments that are performed under the ERO enterprise, the NERC 2023-2024 Winter Reliability Assessment, both PJM and MISO were elevated risk, and this was because of the recent winter storm events that had occurred. And basically, the both of these entities were working on implementing changes, and I think as a result, they had an elevated risk because some of those changes hadn't been fully implemented yet by the time winter had rolled around. And then we actually had a NERC Level 3 Essential Actions Alert. This was the first time a Level 3 has actually been initiated within industry. And this was a survey related to winter preparedness and, what each generator owner had their units designed to, those type of things. So it was an extensive list of questions related to winter preparedness in order to avoid another Winter Storm Elliott type event. And then obviously ReliabilityFirst participates or has a program, is a better way to say it, I guess, of plant winterization visits. And I actually had the experience of going on one of those this year, and they're always great. Basically, the team is there to help share information that we've learned across our footprint. We've been doing this since 2014, basically 10 years now. And all the best practices we've learned, we share that with the entity on site, and then we observe what they're doing and take pictures and then try to share that information with their peers as well. So a lot of information there. I'm only covering a smidgen of it. In regard to continuing with environmental factors, you can go to the next slide. I wanted to just talk about some of the outages that are related to weather in general. If you're looking at lightning, weather excluding lightning, you can see that those outages, if you kind of just take a trend line, they're trending downward over time. So we're actually performing fairly well when it comes to weather-related outages. However, we had a minor uptick in 2022, and we did have one event within our footprint that resulted in end-use customer load loss. So we are improving over time, but we did have a significant event that's notable. And then as far as vegetation, you'll see that's kind of trending downward over time, except for a spike in 2022. So we want to, 1 year doesn't make a trend, but we want to just kind of keep our eye on that and make sure we're not trending back up in the wrong direction. And I want to note that about 94% of our vegetation related outages were on 100 to 199 kV facilities. So that's something that is out of the purview of FACT 3. So as a result, years ago, we started the RF Vegetation Management Community of Practice, where you can just kind of go. There's no Robert's rules. It's very informal. You can just share best practices with all your peers. And try to improve on your existing processes, tools, and procedures. So if you are interested in participating in that and you're not presently, you can contact me or Thomas T. Fatiller in my group, who manages that group. But that's something we're monitoring, and then we're trying to gain interaction and engagement through our community of practice work there. So I'm going to jump to, I think, the next category. Now, Michelle, if you're getting questions already and you want to stop me, so I don't have to go all the way back because there's 8 risk categories, I'm happy to do that if you want. So just let me know.
Okay, thanks, Johnny. We did receive one question in, but it's not specifically related to a risk category, but since we've taken a pause here, I'll go ahead and ask you.
Yeah.
So the question is, because MISO includes territory from Canada to the Gulf of Mexico. And RF covers only a small portion of MISO, that northern portion.
Right.
Does RF coordinate risk evaluation with other NERC regions to determine a holistic risk within the MISO territory?
Yeah. So we do that naturally through our normal work processes. So when we're evaluating, especially like environmental risk in the MISO service territory, we collaborate already through the ERO process to develop like the winter reliability assessment, the summer reliability assessment, and the long-term reliability assessment. We collaborate both with MISO and MRO and CERC in that. So a lot of that feeds into some of the analysis that I just covered on the previous slide. So the short answer is yes. Yeah, we do collaborate with the other regional entities. Now, we don't necessarily look at outages and compare those directly, like what we get through XADS, and compare that directly with what my MRO and CERC are getting. We do it more on a resource adequacy or power flow analysis type standpoint, if that makes sense.
Okay, great. Thanks, Johnny. That was the only question so far. So we'll continue.
So I'm an engineer. I can't help but give you the details. So I can't just give you a simple yes. There has to be an explanation behind that. So I apologize for being long-winded. All right. So cybersecurity is the next risk. And this is basically, most people know what this is, compromise of information technology systems that are helping control and monitor the grid. So what we do is we don't have a lot of good data from independent sources coming in related to, cybersecurity events. So what we rely on here are compliance related information. So what you're seeing here in front of you is reported violations. Now, a majority of these violations are self-reports. So this is basically registered entities telling us that they've had issues or potential issues with different types of cybersecurity categories. SIP 10 is configuration change management. SIP 4 is access management. SIP 7 is patch management. SIP 11 is information protection. So we took some of the, in this graph, we took some of the more pertinent categories here to just display to you and to show you some of the trending there. So you can see for most of the, SIP standards, we're actually seeing a decrease over time in potential violations, except for SIP 7. So what I'll say is based on this, even though like SIP 10 has it's the highest amount of potential non-compliances, we see that trending downward. We are keeping an eye on that. But SIP 7 raised the flag a little bit because you can see it's just trending upward over time. And it is the second most standard with total PNCs. So we saw it trending upward, SIP 7-6 R2. And then, basically what that's showing is that there's a increased risk identified with patching. And then we're also concerned that the standard itself covers what you do when the patch is released, but there's this window of time where the vulnerability is discovered by someone, and then it's reported to the vendor. Then the vendor spends time on fixing that vulnerability. So there's this window outside of the purview of the standard that we also want to focus in on and help registered entities with. So we're trying to get some outreach material related to that as well. So if you're interested, please reach out to RF to kind of beef up your internal controls around that and best practices. But we continually review these metrics. We look for emergent risks based on the findings and some of the mitigation plans that are put together. And then we're performing that patch management outreach. We also have internal tools here. If you're not aware, our group that is headed by Mike Hughes, our entity engagement group. We basically have cyber resilience tools where you can take a survey and it basically tells you how you're resilient you might be related to your cybersecurity posture. So I would recommend, if you want to take advantage of those tools, you could reach out to Mike or through the Assist Visit program. So let me see here. The next slide, I'm going to transition risks now, is the changing resource mix. And this basically talks about the resources that are plugged into our portion of the grid. And the gist here is you want a diverse set of resources. You want a diverse portfolio, like you were investing into the stock market here. You don't want to put all your eggs into one basket. And what we're monitoring are state and federal policy changes that are either incentivizing certain types of resources or de-incentivizing other types of resources. So one thing we've observed from just looking at resource trending over time is that there's an advancement in retirement of conventional resources, and typically these are older natural gas resources and coal, just coal in general. And then what we've seen is those resources are being replaced with inverter-based resources, whether they be solar, wind, or some sort of hybrid facility. And so we've been monitoring these state policy changes. We have some states that have more aggressive policies related to not so much generation per se, but clean energy goal. And so that hits multiple facets, including energy and the utility industry. So we're just tracking these initiatives and trying to incorporate some of this into our work, especially in my department, running studies to determine what could happen as the grid naturally changes. This resource mix changes based on what we're used to. And then we're monitoring the federal policy changes. Basically, this is the Environmental Protection Agency. If you follow this, there's been Supreme Court cases that limits the power the EPA can have, and then there's been legislation that passes that grants them a little more power or reinstates their power as they understood it. So this is kind of an ongoing back and forth right now, and we're trying to keep a pulse on that as well to see how that impacts um, coal and natural gas resources that send out air pollutants. So that's a lot just in that one slide, but we've actually been doing really good work with our state outreach program. That's Diane Holder's group here, the External Affairs group. Actually, Michelle Cross is the lead for a lot of that work, and Brian Theory. So we've been trying to stay plugged into what's going on in that sphere and performing outreach where needed. Next slide just covers a little bit more what I said in detail. Our existing resources, we have very old coal, nuclear, and petroleum resources, 40 to 60 years old. Natural gas is 30 years old. Our footprint overall, when you take a look at our portion of MISO and our portion of PJM, is heavy in natural gas. That's our most dominant fuel source. And then these resources have demonstrated an increase. All these resources, these conventional resources, have demonstrated an increase in forced outage rate or not improving in reliability since 2020. So we're keeping our eye on that and determining if more outreach needed as well. Kind of just take a look at the microcosm of MISO and PJM, and this information is taken from the latest NERC long-term reliability assessment. And this is that study that I had mentioned that we participate with the entire ERO enterprise, plus MISO and PJM. And if you just take a look at MISO, you can see that there's a significant reduction in natural gas and coal. And then they're supplementing that with renewables. But you can see they're not putting as many renewable-based, inverter-based resources as they are losing natural gas and coal. And then if you take a look at PJM, there's a retirement of or loss of natural gas and coal over time. And then that's being supplemented with inverter-based resources through their generation interconnection queue. The one thing I did want to kind of highlight is some of the resource adequacy results from the latest LTRA, the long-term reliability assessment. And it basically indicated that PJM should have sufficient resources until 2033, which is as far as the study goes, with only existing resources. So if you just take a look at their existing resources and you're not looking at substantial retirements, what they're planning to net and gain normally, that they're fine until 2033. However, if they experience substantial retirements of conventional resources, they might not have adequate resources starting until 2031. So that might advance the risk there a little bit. And PJM has put out their own internal analysis that aligns with that same type of logic. And then MISO has something similar where they only have sufficient resources until 2028 with existing, and with both existing and planned resources, so that additional 14,000 megawatts of inverter-based resources, they should have sufficient resources until 2030. So they basically both MISO and PJM, they need that potential generation within their connection queue to materialize to maintain adequate reserve margin. Next slide. So I want to give full credit. This is actually Michelle Cross's slide. It's so good, I had to steal it from her. She uses this slide a lot in presentations she performs, and I probably won't do it justice here, but as well as she does. But the next thing I wanted to transition to is that, okay, I mentioned several times, you heard me say that the conventional resources are retiring and they're being supplanted with these inverter-based resources. Well, the thing I wanted to kind of hammer home is that 1 megawatt in a conventional resources is not equivalent to 1 megawatt in an inverter-based resource. And this little example kind of walks you through why. Basically, in this example, you see the scale there. You have 100 megawatts of conventional generation, and say you're going to utilize that 100 megawatts to produce 24 hours of energy, 100 megawatts an hour. So you have 2,400 megawatt hours of energy being produced over a 24-hour period. If you wanted the equivalent from a solar resource, you would have to supplement that solar resource with batteries, because solar resources are obviously not going to be able to generate when the sun isn't out. So if you take a very simple example and you assume 8 hours of daylight and you assume no losses in conversion, and you have a 300 megawatt resource in solar, you can basically produce 100 megawatts for 8 hours and you get about 800 megawatt hours. But then you need to utilize the additional 200 from the 300 to basically store that energy during the day so you can operate it when it's dark. And that's where you would have a battery come in. So you would charge that battery during the day, and then you would use that battery, probably 2 batteries in this case, to continue operation 100 megawatts an hour for the rest of the evening until the next morning when the sun comes out again. So basically, in this example, you need 100 megawatts of conventional generation and 700 megawatts of combined solar and battery resources. So hopefully I walked you through that okay and explained it well, but that's the complication here, is that you need more inverter-based resources with some sort of storage on the grid to make this work for the grid of the future. Now that might be, I'm going to jump to the next category. That might be a good point to stop and see if we got any more questions, Michelle.
Yeah, Johnny, we do. Okay, so we do have a couple questions around the changing generation mix. So the first question is, do you see generation retirements outpacing new installations?
I would say I'm actually going to cover that a little bit in the supply chain piece. But if I go back to the previous slide, could you do that for me? Go back to that previous slide.
Yep.
it just depends on what area you look at. So in MISO, we do see right now the natural gas and coal outpacing the renewables. You see there's 23,000 megawatts being retired and only 14,000 coming in. In the PJM footprint, you have a little bit more renewables coming in, but for the most part, yeah, if these state policies drive more retirements than what we're projecting, which could happen, and almost certainly, yes, you will see these conventional units outpace what we can bring on and study and integrate into the grid.
Okay, also along these same lines of the changing generation mix, the question is, do you also look at essential reliability services that the fleet provides?
Definitely. I just didn't have time to cover it.
Yeah.
So we definitely look at that, and we incorporate that into a lot of our outreach, because depending on the type of resource, conventional resources can regulate voltage. They provide um, fault duty, so they're helping with inertia. They're actual spinning machines. So we're really looking for advancements in technology to get more of those grid forming type of resources versus these grid following resources that are being integrated now. I'm sorry if you don't know those buzz terms, but that's for another presentation another day. Maybe I can go into those. So
Great. Okay, and last question before we move on. How
sure.
significant are the delays in MISO and PJM generation queue with respect to new renewables being approved and constructed?
I don't know specifically for each one of those. I don't have data at my fingertips related to each one of those queues, but I do have a slide in my supply chain that shows that we did when the EIA data, the overall delay in queue across North America. So there is a delay in connecting generation, but it's mostly due to not study time. It's due to supply chain issues, is what we found.
Okay, and just lastly, before we continue on with the presentation, I'm just going to post up there on Slido. We do have solar animation on our website that also depicts the slide that Johnny showed to help explain it a little better. If you want to click the link and take a look, I put it out there. And with that, Johnny, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to you.
Okay, so I have about 15 minutes left, and I have, I think, 8-ish slides. So I might go a little quick here, so I apologize just based on time. So supply chain just impacts the ability to get access to tools, resources, and if you have any problems, it results in some delay or disruption in system operations. Now, one of the things we covered specifically here in supply chain is leading into the issue that I just covered regarding to these inverter-based resources that are coming onto the grid. I just mentioned that, in order for this to be successful, you need some sort of stored energy for when the sun or wind are not available. And the leading technology right now are lithium-ion batteries. Now there are other technologies out there, but right now that's what's in the generation queues within PJM and MISO right now. It's the leading technology. It's the least cost. Unfortunately, it's also the leading technology for the electric vehicle market. So both of those are the utility industry and the electrical vehicle market. If you take a look at that chart quickly on the right, what we found is that production is not keeping up with demand. So as both of these types of technologies are in need, we don't have enough raw materials being gathered to keep up with the necessary production. So that's one risk we're trying to keep our eye on. And one of the things that, so lithium and cobalt are two of the main raw materials that go into these lithium ion batteries, and what we're seeing is demand outpaces existing production. So we're really emphasizing the need for newer technologies, process improvements, efficiency gains, and definitely advancements in recycling technologies. Most folks don't even think about that, right? You think more about getting the resource attached to the grid and operating. You don't think about what's going to happen once it retires, and what are you going to do with the other elements of that resource. So we really got to make sure we can recycle these and then reuse them once they're done, because I think we're going to be limited in raw materials. So if you go to the next slide, this talks more about the question I just received, where you're looking at solar panels in general. I found a really nice fact sheet put together by it was someone from the one of the, it was either Department of Energy or Department of Defense, one of those. I can't remember off the top of my head now, but they actually had some really interesting facts there, and that's where most of this comes from. Solar panels are mainly dependent on China right now. 97% of the silicon wafer production, which goes into solar panels, happens in China. And basically, U.S. manufacturing is not actively producing any of these components that go into solar panels within the United States. Everything's being imported from China, 97%. So the one recommendation from this fact sheet was that the U.S. should incentivize local manufacturing to pivot to pick up some of this solar production, but I'm not sure that's happened yet. The other thing is that there's been a delay in delivery of panels. About 20% were delayed in 2022. That's according to EIA data that you see in the chart to the right there, from January to June. So we're seeing that these delays in solar panels or the equipment that is needed to construct the solar panels is causing a delay for up to 6 months for some of these installations to be connected to the grid. So we're constantly trying to beef up the data we collect and keep up on this risk, make sure we're staying on top of it. The other thing that's neat to note is there's actually a Labor Prevention Act 14, which prohibits importing goods made with forced labor in China's Zhejiang province. And it's because they're using forced labor, we prohibit using those products. So a lot of the solar products are manufactured in that province of China. So we'll actually, our government will stop that from being imported, and that's what's causing some of these delays as well. Okay, physical security. I'm sprinting now because I want to get to the end here. So, real quick on supply chain, we did look at cyber supply risks too associated with SIP 13, and we're trending downward in that over time. So, as far as potential non-compliances, so just wanted to note that we did look at that. If you're curious as to why it wasn't included there. Physical security is just looking at physical damage or compromise of access to elements on the grid, and then potentially damaging those elements to prevent operation of the grid. If you look at the chart to the right, that's provided by the ISAC, and that's looking at attacks on the bulk power system over time. And you can see there was a dramatic increase in 2022. You may have heard of some of the attacks in North Carolina that resulted in local loss of power. Fortunately for our footprint, we did not have any type of attacks that resulted in customer load loss, but we did experience an uptick in facility threats, vandalism, and drone activity within our footprint. So we're taking that pretty seriously, and we're keeping an eye on that with various metrics that we have here at RF. As far as managing the risk, there was a technical forum, a joint forum put on by FERC and NERC last year as a result of a FERC order related to SIP 14, which is protecting critical infrastructure. And then most likely there will be some more activity on that in the ERO enterprise sphere, whether it be reliability guidelines or enhancement of existing standards based on the findings from that technical conference. And then we have our own RF threat intelligence program that's set up by my sister group, which is the Operational Awareness and Analysis Group. We're in the same department. That's led by Tony Pergar and his team. And what they're doing is looking at online resources, other outside data resources, and they're looking for emergent threats to our footprint, reviewing those internally, and then determining what kind of action needs to be taken based on what they find. Does it require internal communication, external communication, that type of thing. So they've stood up this new threat intelligence program within ReliabilityFirst. Okay, next slide. I'm really trying to plug through here. Misoperations. We used to be the worst performing regional entity in misoperations. And my boss would let me know this every day. So it was a top priority to try to get these down over time. And as you can see, we've been pretty successful as of late. This happened prior to me coming into the group, so I can't take credit for it. But since 2014, you can see we had really high misoperation rates based on that table. And we had high misoperation count. We went from about 400 misoperations down to about 150, 160 misoperations a year. So we cut that number in half. RF can't take sole credit for that. There was a lot of hard work, resources, and dedication put in by some of our regional entities to help drive that number down. So we've been doing really well in misoperative performance as of late. We're going to have an uptick in 2023. Our 2023 is going to look, by the end of the year, up till now, we only have Q3 data in there. We're evaluating the Q4 data right now, but it looks like 2023 is going to be a mirror of 2021. So we'll probably have an 8% misop rate and have around 160 misoperations by the end of the year this year. So if we go to the next slide, this is something I just wanted to point out. We've been trying to monitor and manage this risk for quite some time. There's been P5 contingencies in the new TPL 01, 5.1. That has to do with protection systems and the lack of redundancy and the need to identify those outages and what impact they have on the grid. We've had multiple engagements. Some of the entities that we've engaged with, you can see in the chart I have here down at the bottom, the ones that we've had heavy engagement with and the ones that have invested heavily into their system infrastructure and put together dedicated mitigation plans. You can see there that when we've done outreach with entities and they've put the resources against the problem there, you can see the substantial drop in misoperation count and then the rate. Where on the other hand, those entities that haven't participated in an outreach or put some rigor around their plans there, you can see they're kind of going up a little bit, trending upwards. So really that it just emphasizes all the regional entities that put in hard work and our outreach partnership with them. So let's go to the next slide, since I only have a couple minutes left. Modeling, I'm getting to the two last risks here. Modeling, we don't have a lot of great data coming in for modeling. So again, we rely on the reliability standards and we look at the FAC and the MOD suite of standards. The MOD suite has the second highest reported violations that are non-SIP. And then FAC is, but they're trending downward over time. And the FAC suite of standards are trending a little bit upward in the last year. So we're just keeping our eye on that. That's mostly due to, I think, some FAC 8 things going on. So we're just keeping a pulse on that to make sure we don't start trending in the wrong direction. There's been some things here that can complicate this risk, though. FERC order number 881, that's the ambient adjusted facility ratings. And that's going to make the FACS suite of standards a little more complex. So we might see an additional uptick as a result of that being implemented. And then really what we want to do here is just make sure that some of these new inverter-based resources, that the models that are being developed for those inverter-based resources matches the actual performance in the field. So that's kind of our focus within my group. And we're trying to develop methods for best practices and developing some of these errors within models proactively. Next slide. Situational awareness. This is basically taking a look at how you're monitoring the system, mainly in real-time operations. And if you look at performance overall on that graph to the right, you can see that um, we have very low outages related to our energy management systems within our footprint since 2020. But the main themes around the highest drivers behind those outages are basically inaccurate data, software, and maintenance. So for inaccurate data, we see a lot of our entities are swapping out or installing new energy management systems through different vendors. And as a result of that, when they upgrade those EMS and the tools associated with it, they're getting better data management tools associated with those upgrades. So we would anticipate maybe that would go down over time. As far as the software, this is pertaining mostly to updating software. So again, this goes back to patch management. Again, this is a large risk within our footprint, and that's what we're seeing compromise some of these energy management systems, and then maintenance overall. So we're continuing to monitor this through our Tony Pergard's group and our threat intelligence program. So we're anything that pops up, you would get a notification from that group if it's something substantial. The last two slides, I know I'm hitting the end of the meeting here, are tying in some of those interdependencies that I had mentioned before. So these are like main takeaways based on interdependencies. So this first one is the increasing impact of cold weather on resource availability. If you remember me saying earlier that most of the resources within our footprint are natural gas, well, what's natural gas susceptible to? Cold weather events. So yeah, when we experience a large winter storm or a large swath of an area within our footprint experiencing cold weather for multiple days on end, we see that a majority of our generation within our footprint is unavailable because it's natural gas. It's open air plants that basically are outage because they don't have, they can't withstand substantial cold for multiple days, and you know they might not have some of the proper monitoring and prevention tools. So some of those new standards are trying to mitigate that risk that are coming into play. But the policy change is also driving a lot of that because that's what's creating the eggs in all the natural gas bucket essentially. You know, so we have a retirement of coal, and so now you basically have natural gas and nuclear, and then inverter-based resources, which are also susceptible to these cold weather events as well. So we're just tracking progress on some of the joint inquiry reports and what comes out of those, and tracking the progress on some of those recommendations. And then we're tracking the federal, state, and local RTO, ISO policy changes related to cold weather. And then we're performing our own studies internally here to determine, you know, what are the risks during cold weather events. So if you want to participate or volunteer to participate in our winter readiness program, if you're a generator owner operator, again, you can reach out through our assist visit program to Mike Hughes, and they can help you out there. And then, you know, basically we're also monitoring some of these standards that are being developed and approved right now related to cold weather. So let me go to the very last one, and I'll try to get this done quick so you can all um, hopefully start ending your day. The rapid pace of change is increasing our resource uncertainty and supply chain issues. I kind of covered this a little bit with some of the risks that I covered, but when you meld them together, it forms this giant robot risk like Voltron that's bad for the universe, right? Um, so basically, we have some of the states that are in our footprint. We have these aggressive federal and state policies that are influencing carbon-based resource retirements, and then those are being supplemented with these inverter-based resources, and that's going to require energy storage. So that's that story I was telling earlier, right? Where we're seeing substantial retirements of conventional units. Those are being supplemented with inverter-based resources. In order for that to work in our modern grid, we need some of those inverter-based resources to be paired with energy storage. And we need to make sure that those technologies are readily available, and there's enough resources to continue to create energy storage and solar panels and Wind's not as impacted solar and energy storage, lithium ion technologies. So we're trending the growth. We're trending some of the supply chain, the raw materials. We're looking at federal and state policies that are incentivizing some of these resource types and new technologies. And then we're trying to assist by giving best practices with, hey, not only should you incentivize this type of resource, but really you should incentivize how it's recycled once they're done with it, because they do depreciate over time. When EV vehicles run their end of life, let's get better at being efficient at recycling those and turning them into something useful that we can use on the utility side or for additional electrical vehicles, those type of things. So we're continuing to educate and perform outreach in this space. All right, I tried to get through it as quick as possible. If there's questions for people hanging on, feel free to ask. If not, you can just send me an email. I'd be happy to do that and answer your question that way. But go ahead, Michelle. I'll hand it back over to you.
Thank you, Johnny. That was a great overview. We do have a couple questions. So the first one is around misoperations. And
Okay.
Given the number of relays and inherent probability of failure of that relay, is it possible that 100 misops per year may be as low as we can go? Or what are your thoughts on that of what we hope or expect to see as we continue working on this?
I think that's a very good point, very good observation, and that's something we're also keeping our eye on as far as there's going to be a minimum level we're going to be able to get to, right? So as far as misoperations per year, just based on the sheer amount of elements and protection systems we have out there. I what we have seen in the relay failure space is that historically that was relay failures were mainly the electromechanical relays that were failing. Now we're seeing the first generation microprocessor relays failing. So most entities have proactive programs to replace the electromechanical relays and then those first generation microprocessor based relays. Some other good practices we've seen is that the primary relay is from one vendor and the secondary relay is from another vendor. So you don't have that weird supply chain issue. That's another thing that I would recommend. But yes, I think eventually we'll get down to a point where it's going to be really hard to get below a certain level. I just don't know what that is yet feasibly. We kind of have to just play the waiting game over time to see how many we're going to see over a year, because 20-year life cycle on some of these assets that are out in the field, depending on who the vendor is. So
yep. Thanks. And last question, what actions is RF taking to ensure adequate dispatchable generation remains within our footprint?
oh man, what aren't we doing? I mean, geez, Michelle, you could talk to this way better than I could. This is what Michelle does like 90% of her time. She's basically performing outreach and reaching out to anyone who will listen to her about what these risks are and how we can help influence to get a more comprehensive view. She's doing a lot of outreach, her team, with state commissioners, state technical staff, legislatures, those type of thing. We've had Diane Holder actually talk at several hearings. She's been called as a witness. We've been doing anything we can on the outreach wing, these tech talks and our committee structures. We talk about these type of risks all the time. So that's what we're trying to do. We can't force anybody to do certain policies, and we shouldn't. We should just tell you about the risks, and you need to evaluate those risks internally and adjust your policies or practices accordingly. That's how we handle our outreach here. So
yep. Thanks, Johnny. Well said. And that wraps up today's show. And so thank you to our audience and our presenters for joining us today. And please be sure to join us for our next Tech Talk on April 15th. And we're very excited. We will have David Batts, Managing Director in Infrastructure Security from EEI, coming on our April Tech Talk. And he's going to be talking about transformer supply chain concerns. We're really excited to have him on. We've heard him speak before. He's a great presenter. And we've really been trying to find an expert to really talk about these supply chain concerns. So we're really looking forward to his presentation next month. So thank you all for joining and have a great rest of your week.